Good afternoon. We are going to be going through our PowerPoint for From Ruin to Recovery. And this is how does an area recover from a disastrous event, or how does one grow in the first place? What you should be doing is filling in your fill-in notes. You can do that one of two ways. You can print them off like I've done and fill them in as you watch your lesson. Or you can just pull it up on the Google Classroom and you have your own copy there, and you could go through and fill in the notes if you're able to do that. You might not be able to because it's a PDF, so just see what works the best. I'll kind of pause every time it's time to fill in something, and you'll know that I've reached something that you should be filling in. So if you'll notice on this PowerPoint right here, there's a video. I'm not going to show that video now, but you can go ahead and click on the link on the lesson and watch the video. It does a very good job of explaining and giving you a visual of what succession is. Okay, so there's two different types of succession. The first type is called primary succession, and that's when a community starts to grow in an area where there is no soil. So that's our first two blanks on our form. Starts to grow in an area with no soil. So if you have no soil, there's no way for plants to grow, and we know that animals rely on plants, so it's got to get started somewhere. So the first organisms that are going to come in, and they're going to live in this uninhabited area, something that's never been inhabited before, are called a pioneer species. We know, and those are next two blanks, live in an uninhabited area, and what are they called? Pioneer species. We know the word pioneer means someone who goes first where nothing's been before, and so that's why they're called pioneer species. Now, some examples are lichens, L-I-C-H-E-N, that's our next blank, lichens, and they grow on rocks. That's a blank. And they help to form soil. So if you've got soil, you can eventually have plants, and they can grow there. So when would this happen? There's two. There's not really blanks for you to write it, but you're going to want to write this down next to where it says in which plants can grow. Events that date or predate primary succession are volcanic eruption and glacier formation. So think about it. The Hawaiian Islands have not always been the lush, beautiful Hawaiian Islands that you see now. They were formed from a volcano. Volcano erupted. Lava flowed, and what kind of rock was formed? Do you guys remember from last year what type of rock forms from volcanic eruption, lava flow? You are right if you said igneous rock. So the Hawaiian Islands were once just a bunch of big pieces of igneous rock, and then those rocks eventually turned into what they are today. But the thing that had to happen first was wind blows in lichens. You can see some examples there of what lichens look like. That's rock, and it's got algae and fungi growing on it. And so they're not a plant, but they do have the ability to photosynthesize because they need energy too, right? So how are they going to get energy? They photosynthesize. And so they grow on bare rock. They don't have a whole lot of root needs, so that's why they're able to do that. And they break down the rock. And we know that weathering is the word that means to break down rocks. So they're weathering the rock. And when they break down the rock, they're going to live and die, break down rock. And this continues, takes a very long time, but they're eventually creating soil. So this broken down material eventually is going to create what is going to be soil that's going to eventually be something that plants will be able to come in and take hold in. And so that's going to continue to happen. And so you have these rocks out in the middle of nowhere. How are those seeds that are eventually going to get into the soil going to arrive there? What are some things that are going to bring those seeds and eventually animals to that location? I'll let you think about that for a second, and then I'll tell you a story. So you can see this picture that's here in your notes. Primary succession. Remember, there was no life there before. You start with bare rock. And then you've got these lichens and mosses that are going to grow. They live, they die, they live, they die. Eventually, you've got some soil. And then you're going to get small plants, ones that don't have very deep roots. They're going to go in and they will not have a lot of soil needs because they don't have deep roots, but they photosynthesize and they're going to live, die, and that's going to make the soil grow deeper. And eventually, you're going to have small shrubs that can come in and take hold. And then before you know it, they've lived, died. The soil will grow deeper and will be thick enough to eventually be able to hold tree roots. And so once you have tree roots, then you have a whole lot of different possibilities for organisms that can be supported by that environment. So how do those organisms get there? We're out in the middle of the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. How did the seeds for grass get there? How did the seeds for shrubs and trees and eventually birds and insects and all of that get there? Any ideas? You are right if you said wind or water. Water can wash it ashore. Those seeds can live in water, but the other things, I mean, you're not going to have grasshoppers that are swimming to Hawaii. So I have a story real quick. My sister and I, we went to Hawaii. This is about 6-7 years ago. We went to Hawaii together. And while we were there, we're walking around and there's just chickens everywhere. They're just walking around the street. We're like, why are there chickens everywhere on the street? And we asked some of the shopkeepers there when we were out shopping, and they said the hurricane blew them in. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, we had a hurricane. It came, blown, the winds blew in, the hurricane's gone. There's just chickens everywhere. They got blown in by the storm. So I want you to picture that in your head. Chickens flying across the ocean, landing in Hawaii. I mean, it was probably a rough trip, but I mean, if I'm going to have to fly through the air somewhere, I'd like to land in Hawaii. All right, now the second type of succession is called secondary succession, and this happens in an area that has been disturbed, but it still has soil. So when we talk about disturbances, what are the types of disturbances that would destroy a habitat that is already established? So I want you to think about that while we fill in the first blank here. It says happens in an area that has been disturbed, but still has soil. Sometimes an existing ecosystem is damaged by natural disturbances. I think our question is about to get answered right here. Such as, and there's our examples, fire or flood or farmland that is cleared. In any case, if soil is left, the original community may regrow through a series of stages. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. You have a normal area of land that's already gone through the primary succession at some point in time long, long ago, and it's got trees and grass and animals and everything are living there, and a forest fire comes along. Think Bambi. And it rips through the forest and gets rid of everything that's there. If it's living, it gets destroyed. And then eventually that's going to have to regrow. And so if you look at this diagram right here, that's exactly your example, okay? You've got a forest fire. And so if you look at the first picture that's right after the forest fire and where it says 0 years, you can see that you've got the charred stumps of the trees still there. And there's still going to be ash and decay that are there. It's going to take time for those to weather away and to be gone. And after that happens, then that will provide nutrients for the soil, and those things will actually make the soil nutrient filled and ready to grow something new. And then you can see in 1 to 2 years, you're going to have little annual plants that'll come in and take hold. Notice that they're very small. They don't require a whole lot of soil. But then after that, you're going to have grasses and perennials. The difference between an annual and a perennial is that perennials come back every year. Okay. And then you're going to have shrubs, and then you'll have small trees, and then you'll have larger trees. And then eventually you'll get the large oak trees, and it'll be an established forest again. And notice that they use that word climax community. Basically, a climax community is one that's just as good as it's ever going to get. Okay. It's not going to, there's not going to be bigger trees forever and ever and ever. Some trees only get as big as they get. And eventually another catastrophic event will come through and cause it to go through secondary succession again. Now, here's another example of secondary succession. And remember, what separates it from primary to secondary succession is that primary succession, nothing lived there before, but in secondary, something was there. You had an established ecosystem that got destroyed. And so here you can see this nice pond. It's got pretty trees all around it, lilies, fish swimming in it. Probably got frogs in the water over there, kind of at the shore. Everything just seems beautiful and happy. And then what do you think the ecological event is that occurred picture number 2 to happen? You are right if you said a drought came along. So this drought came along. You've got less water. The plant life isn't going to be as supported, and so they're going to die. Roots are going to start being exposed. Everything's going to be less green. Look at the fish. They have a whole lot less water to live in, so now they're competing for resources, and then eventually you're going to have it recover, and you see that different plants are growing back in different quantities. So it will recover, but it's just not going to be the same exact thing as it was before. Okay, so I hope you were thinking about other events that could cause secondary succession to happen. And so I gave the example of a forest fire and then a drought. By the way, that forest fire picture right there is really going to help you on part 4 of the Explore activity, which is a tier 2 activity this week. So make sure you go and look at part 4 and you'll get the answers. What you've got to do on that is you've got to, the pictures are numbered. You've got to put them in the correct order. They're not in the correct order. But based on the story that you've been given, you want to put them in the correct order. But other catastrophic events that could happen that could cause secondary succession to take place would be obviously a tornado, a hurricane, earthquake. Think back to our catastrophic event chapter. Any of those things can destroy an ecosystem and require it to have to reestablish itself. All right, so why does succession happen? Well, during succession, organisms and their physical surroundings alter their physical surroundings in a way that makes these surroundings more suitable for other kinds of organisms. Okay, so for other kinds of organisms, let's write that down. That's our next blank. And less suitable for themselves. If you'll notice in the pond picture I showed you, I don't know if you can tell, but on the third picture, even though things started growing back in the place where the pond had been, they weren't the same organisms. They were organisms that didn't require as much water. So different things were more suitable for that new environment. All right. And then it says, as a result, new organisms invade and the old organisms move out. That's what my son is about to do. His wedding has been put off because of the COVID virus. They're going to be having their big wedding on May 29th, which is like the day after school gets out, because the venue canceled it. And so they're still going to get married. just have their immediate families there, and they're going to reschedule their wedding for July 5th. And so he's going to move out like happens during secondary succession. All right, signs of a mature ecosystem. So it says that succession can take a few decades. That would actually be a short amount of time. How many years are in a decade? That you are right if you said 10. A few hundred years. That's the next blank. 100 years. Or even longer. So this isn't something, this forest scenario that I gave you, that doesn't happen in 1 year. If you'll notice, they give a timeline of 150 years. It takes a very long time for an ecosystem to re-establish itself after a catastrophic event. Okay, so there is an order that things happen, and that's our next bullet point. The producers come first. What's a producer? Something that makes its own food. Okay, so they're going to be the ones that come first because there's no food there. So it's going to have to be something that's going to be able to come in and use the sunlight to make their own food. They're going to establish this new ecosystem. And so then after that, you're going to have decomposers. You got to have something to decompose, right? So the decomposers are going to come in, and then you're going to have consumers come in. Once the producers are there and established, the consumers can come in and eat them. How nice of them. Well, over time, you're going to eventually have a stable and balanced ecosystem that's going to develop. The matured community is known as a climax community. That's when it's got all the resources it needs, it's doing well, and it just isn't really going to get any better than that. And it says it has climax species. And so you know you have a climax community when you have a climax species that's living in an area and thriving. So a large oak tree would be an example of a climax species. Those don't just live anywhere. They live in very well-established ecosystems. So as succession continues, things live, die, live, die, live, die. They put nutrients into the soil and they become more available. Now, the more nutrients you have in the soil and the more established an ecosystem is, you're going to be seeing this word biodiversity. And bio means life, and diversity means the different types of something. So different kinds of living things. So the more biodiversity you have in an ecosystem, the greater sustainability it's going to have, the more successful it's going to be. And that's really important. So you've got some vocabulary terms here to fill out. I'll go ahead and put those up. You can pause the video when you're filling out the last section there. Tells you exactly what succession is, breaks it down into primary succession, and the organisms that make that successful are called pioneer species, and then secondary succession. That is going to be the end of our fill-in notes here. And, my daughter has an alarm going off. I hope you guys are doing well and have a good day.